Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel BethChatsBooks. Now today's video is going to be my review of Traplines by Eden Robinson. Now I gave this book 4.8/5 out of 5 stars. And for me I found this very difficult to give a star rating of, because upon reflection I felt like I'd given it too harsh, giving it maybe a 4.5, so I bumped it up to a 4.8. But I have a secret niggle in my mind of why I don't think I can give this a full 5 stars. Now the main issues that I've had with it, in terms of, I'll get the bad bits out of the way before I do the glowing half of the review. The main issues I have with why I don't think it can be that full 5-star effect is because the first 2 stories and the last story I thought were quite short and compact in terms of what they attempted to do. I liked that they both all had ambiguous endings, but there wasn't enough character development, so I was left wanting more with them. And then the story in the middle progressed for a substantial amount of time, in which I think it could have been condensed a lot more and got to the point at a speedier rate than it did. And I'll show you through the kind of plotting of the book the difference. Traplines is only that much, if you can see. Dogs in Winter, another small chunk of the book. And then Contact Sports, which is the main bit, quite a thick amount. And then Frog Song is only that much. So it has a significant difference, and Contact Sports was my least favourite of all the stories, and that ended up being the thickest amount in the book. So that's why I don't think I can give it 5 stars, because it wasn't organised in the best way. The characters that I was most interested in were the first 2 stories, and they were a lot more compact. But now I'm going to go into the stories a little bit more for you. So Traplines is about Will Bolton, and he has a very dysfunctional family life. All of these stories are based on Indigenous people living in the community. Eden Robinson is an Indigenous person in Canada, and what's really interesting, you can read these stories and not necessarily know that about the characters or about the author. It's not explicit in the pieces, but it makes a very interesting undertone to all of these stories. So back to that story. Will Bolton has a very dysfunctional home life. His brother is involved with a lot of drugs. He takes a lot of drugs. I presume he sells a lot of drugs. He hangs out with a lot of druggies. And he has house parties. His mother drinks a lot to cope with life. His dad is very violent, and Will Bolton starts a relationship with his English teacher, in which he goes to visit them. He has sleepovers at their house, and his English teacher and her husband really like the boy. I think they feel very sorry for him. They quickly understand that violence or neglect is part of Will Bolton's life. It's just part of his day-to-day life. So it starts with the English teacher invites all the students to a family barbecue, and they quickly realise when Will tries to ring his family and no one's home that his parents have forgotten about him, so they offer for him to sleep over for the night, and then they'll take him home the next day. And it progresses from there. They realise that he's often left alone. He's often hiding from his brother, who's been beating him up or telling him off for something or grassing him up, and his dad and his mum often have disappearing acts where they just leave for a period of time. So that was a fantastic, interesting story. Now all these stories are connected by the idea that they have dysfunctional family lives, or they have psychotic or damaging characters in them that affect the main protagonist, who's usually a character that is experiencing a coming of age narrative that's not conventional. So they're usually teenagers, or they've had some kind of experience. So this one dealt with abuse and neglect from the family home. Now the second story has a similar plot line. So Alyssa Rutford is a little girl who was living with her mum, but her mum is a serial killer, and she's been accused of many different murders. She butchers the neighbour's dog. That gets told quite early on in the story, and she goes to live with her grandma, and while her mother is in prison, and her mother escapes from prison or is released, it's not made explicitly clear, and goes to seek revenge on the mother. She kills the mother, takes the daughter, and then the mother ends up back in prison. She gets, it's all revealed, and she has to live in care. So Alyssa, as a character, is a lot more damaged than Will. She's had to deal with a murderous mother. She's really scared as she's coming of age that she's going to inherit the characteristics that her mother did. She's very conflicted. She's lost her grandma. She keeps trying to commit suicide in the story. It's very, very dark and sad, but that one really gripped me. Out of all the stories, that's the one I was so interested in, it being longer, the storyline being explained. It had a really interesting structure, that story, because we learn about her being in care first, and then it goes back to when she lived with her grandma, then it goes back to when she lived with her mum, so it's not a chronological story structure. That's why I think I was so intrigued, because the pieces didn't necessarily fit in the order it was given to you, and that's why I really wanted more depth with that particular story. I was fascinated with that one. That's the girl stories, ironically, because there's 2 girl protagonists in 2 stories and 2 boy protagonists. The girls are a lot darker, more intense. And then the next one is Contact Sports, and his name is, I have to keep going to the inside flat because I keep forgetting the names, Tom. And Jeremy, his cousin, comes to visit, and Jeremy then just plays some psychotic twists and turns onto the poor boy. He gets money from somewhere, we don't really know where he gets the money from. He's been kicked out of the army, and he comes to live with them to set himself up, and he keeps terrorising emotionally, psychologically and physically his cousin, and he can't cope with this, and his mum thinks that the sun shines out of Jeremy's arse, and he can't explain the abuse he's suffering, and it goes further along. It was quite drawn out, the abuse was quite drawn out, and you just got this undertone, this sense that something wasn't right, but the story was written in a way that you couldn't put your finger on what was so terribly wrong. So there's a lot of scenes in this book where he tickles him in public, and the segments where he tickles him is real uncomfortable to read, because it's not written in a funny, he's just tickled him and they're giggling. It is a form of abuse, but it's a very difficult one to kind of calibre, because it's not like he is beating him up in public. It's a very strange, and that dynamic, Eden Robinson is really good at creating this tone in the book of these subtle kinds of abuse that's very hard to distinguish, but you get this sense as a reader of being entirely uncomfortable, and that I definitely felt in that story. I just thought it was slightly drawn out too much, but I like that she makes all of these endings kind of ambiguous, so the story doesn't end as such, you just leave the story, and I really, really like that about her storytelling. And then the last story, I've forgotten her name because it doesn't say on the inside flap. I don't think it gives her a name, and the story is called The Queen of the North, and I don't think she has a name in it, but it often references her uncle in it and her cousin Ronnie. And basically she is being abused by her uncle, and her cousin Ronnie doesn't know, and he gives her little trinkets and gifts. So when they were younger, they both really wanted this specific Barbie doll accessory, and he bought it for the main protagonist in that story, and the cousin Ronnie got really jealous because it's her father, and she thought, why didn't she get the gift? So he always leaves her money, and one time Ronnie comes round to the house and sees that there's been money left, and she doesn't know who left it to, her cousin, and she keeps asking her, where's it from, where's it come from, and she's too scared to tell Ronnie it's come from her uncle, and that her uncle abused her, and she can't find a right way to communicate it. And this leads to kind of destructive behaviour with drugs and trying to escape, and that was an interesting story. That's had an emotional punch, and considering it was the last story, I expected the last story to be less intense, as a way of ending the world that Eden Robinson tries to create in all the stories, to kind of leave you. But it was just as poignant and effective as the first one, I think. So I think the collection as a whole is very, very strong. I thoroughly enjoyed this. These are characters that will resonate with you long after you finish reading this book, because of their intensity, because of the darkness of their stories, and because you leave the story never finishes. So you never know a sense of closure for these characters. But I just love her writing style. I love how she discusses these communities and sets this tone when she writes about the abuse that leaves you severely uncomfortable. Now, I know that sounds like a cliche and a really stupid thing to say, because of course when people write abuse they want you to feel uncomfortable, but there's a subtlety, there's this really nice dichotomy between what she writes of subtlety about abuse and intensity of abuse, and they are intrinsically linked in this, but in a way that some moments hit you full force and others sink into your being, and you think afterwards that slow burning sense of something not being quite right. And she's phenomenal at juxtaposing those two feelings throughout the collection. So it's a phenomenal piece. I would love to read more of what she's done. This is quite dated now. This is as old as me, so this is 21 years old, but it still has such a strength, such an intensity, such a fantastically composed collection. And I think collections are very hard to do, because most of the time people can find one or maybe two that they don't like in a story collection. That changes the whole perception, but this is a very strong piece. I would highly recommend this, and I adored this. I think I will really benefit from giving this a reread, because there's bits I think I missed or I didn't quite understand. This is definitely one that can be enhanced with a reread. So I thoroughly enjoyed this, and it got 4.8 stars. I think maybe if I reread it and really take on board some of the fantastic things she wrote and that she can create, then I think this might go to a 5-star. But for now, a very strong 4.8. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I highly recommend you read it. And I'll link a link to go check this book out on the synopsis down below. So that's everything for this video. I really hope you enjoyed that. Let me know any great books that you've been reading, or if you ever read Traplines, what you thought of it, and whether you liked it or disliked it. And I'll shortly be uploading a new video for you guys, so make sure that you keep an eye out to check it out. Thank you guys for watching. Bye!